The Olympics are on at the moment, and I've heard many athletes say, actually, it's not really the medal, it's the process by you start at the beginning and you go through the finishing line. And that for me resonates.
How did you make a transition from being a CFO to being a coach?
I have a personality that is generally never satisfied with what I did yesterday. What I tried to do in an executive career prior to coaching was always try and recognize there were things missing and to try and fill those gaps with more exposure. I found myself a role, gave me those additional areas, and that held me to another level of being better, not necessarily a master, but being better than I was before.
In the process of becoming a coach, people tell me that the most difficult part is to let themselves move out of the way. What was the most difficult part for you while you were on your journey to become a coach?
I think you have to let go, cast aside the profile and the public persona that other people see and perhaps you portrayed and wanted people to see. You're going to find it uncomfortable and you're going to find it difficult because you're going to have to look in the mirror a lot deeper than you've ever looked before.
Isn't it beautiful where people are saying that we would like to see a shift in their behaviors and values? I believe that the context can change the content.
Coaching doesn't have a black-white answer. We want everybody to be able to be a leader in our organization. And that's what we want leadership development coaching to do. We want it to be a cascading waterfall whereby leadership development coaching is about behaviors and values. And everybody can display that. So everybody can be a leader. One thing that came through was this concept of obliquity, whereby instead of giving people direct targets to achieve, coaching can give people the indirect levers.
Jeremy, thank you so much. Such a pleasure having you here, my friend.
Pleasure's all mine, Gaurav. So yeah, delighted to be on your podcast.
Jeremy, I don't know where should I begin. Very often, I should put it rather this way. Very rare you come across someone who's a coach and who has been an executive himself. Having gone through this journey, because only then you understand where it pains the most. So that's one part of the conversation that I would like to have with you.
Sure.
But I really love to understand who I'm talking to. Who is this person? Where is he coming from? What makes him who he is? So, Jeremy, if you can just share with me one of those episodes from your childhood that has shaped you become who you are.
Mine, Gaurav, it goes right back to my primary school education. And I can pick out one individual who was my headmaster when I was the age of 8 or 9. And he was very traditional, Gaurav, in the education system in the UK. He was very much into sport. He was a cricket coach, and my sport is cricket. And he was very much of an individual who had clear guidelines, clear advice, very much actually quite like my father, quite traditional, but he wanted people to take responsibility for their actions, even at a very young age. And at the age of 8 or 9, not just myself, but a few other people as well were invited to speak to the whole school. So we would play cricket and football, Gaurav, and we would then overnight have to write our reports and deliver it to 300 people at the age of 8 or 9. And that for me was the start of me being responsible, accountable, dealing with other people, and recognizing to a certain extent as well, somebody had entrusted me, Gaurav, to do that. And if I'd have thought about it too much at that stage, I probably would have said, I can't do that. So that grounding from my headmaster was absolutely integral in terms of somebody saying, I believe in you. And then a couple of other things happened. People who trusted me to open the batting at cricket, trusted me to be captain of the team. And my guidance after that was, do you know what? I'll try and do that for other people as a coach going forward. So that's been part of the journey throughout my life and my career, Gaurav.
And Jeremy, I'm just wondering, you use the word trusted me.
Mm.
Was that the first encounter when you learned about trust?
It was the belief. It was the
Mm.
belief that somebody had said, I'm going to select you. I'm going to, and he selected other people in other areas as well, people who are good at singing for the choir. Um, but in terms of trust, that paid back
Mm.
massively because it gave you that belief. It gave you that confidence, I think, at a very early age
Mm.
when you're trying to find your way as a very young boy to be part of you as an individual. So somebody there is saying to you, you can go and be your own individual self, and I'm going to trust you to find your own way. And there might
Mm.
be a few bumps along the way, but I'm going to trust you to actually find that way.
Yeah.
If you fall, I'm going to help you up.
Yeah.
Um, but I might let you fall occasionally, and it might help you
Yeah.
in the long run.
And you'll have to learn how to swim yourself. I'll
And learn
not
how to
let you
get back
drown
up.
for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This is so interesting that on so many occasions, Jeremy, our teachers play such a vital role,
Mm.
such a vital role. And it shifts the way we look at life, the way we look at learning, the way we look at that particular subject. By the way, what was your favorite subject growing up?
When I wasn't playing cricket, which was quite a lot of the time, actually, Gaurav, not so much these days, but my favorite subject, I actually had a combination of subjects.
Hmm.
I was I was good at maths.
Hmm.
I actually liked English literature and I liked history.
Hmm.
My only downside of the education that I had was it was slightly biased towards do what you're good at. And actually, there were other things which I think now could have been as interesting. But I'm happy with what I did. I had some good teachers. I enjoyed most of the school, and it
Hmm.
provided me with opportunity.
Yeah. Mathematics, literature, and history. What a
Yeah,
combination.
yeah, quite a combination. People say to me, Gaurav, when people say you're now a coach, but you were a CFO, it's like,
Yeah.
how did that happen? And I did engineering at university.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you did your engineering, you moved on and became a CFO,
Mm.
and then you are a practicing coach. Different
Yes.
transitions. Jeremy, since you just spoke about the different transitions that you've gone through in your life. What does transition mean to you? And how do you look at any upcoming transition?
For me, Gaurav, the transition is deciding to commit to a particular pathway that is making you interested and forms a challenge. For
Hmm.
me, I've always worked with what's the next step? Where's the next challenge? I think I have a relatively low boredom threshold,
Hmm.
which leads me to do new things, first of all, in my executive career, and now in my coaching career as well. So for me, it's all about what's next. And if we achieve various challenges, what's the next challenge? Where's the next set of goalposts to
Hmm.
actually do something useful? And that keeps me mentally and intellectually challenged. I hope it helps other people around me
Hmm.
to be able to be part of that journey.
Hmm.
But seeing the challenge, understanding what's necessary to get there, working hard to achieve that challenge provides me with a great sense of satisfaction.
Hmm.
So deciding to go back to university to do my coaching qualifications was incredibly exciting for me
Hmm.
because it was reminded myself of actually how I quite enjoyed passing examinations 30 to 40 years ago. And it's not
Yeah.
just the exam, it's the process. We
Yeah.
hear this, the Olympics are on at the moment, and I've heard many athletes say, actually, it's not really the medal, it's the process by you start at the beginning
Hmm.
and you go through the finishing line. And that for me resonates a lot with me.
What led you to move from engineering and get into the finance domain?
I did some work experience as an engineer at the time. So I spent a year before university with
Hmm.
an engineering company. I just felt, Gaurav, that it was slightly more limiting for me.
Hmm.
And I was beginning to understand a bit more about running an organization and running a business. So the idea of having a product or a service and doing that as being part of a board, part of a leadership team, I asked myself the question, what's the best way for me to be able to do that?
Mm.
And I concluded that actually, if I was to be involved in finance, I thought that would be a really good way of being involved in most of the decision making
Yeah.
in an organization. There wouldn't be too many parts of that organization that wouldn't touch me. I always had the intention, having qualified, of going into industry and being part of a team, part of a leadership team. And I was able to do that. But that was the journey for me from engineering to finance.
Yeah. Of course, the next logical question is, how did you make a transition from being a CFO to being a coach? But I will not get there.
Okay.
You know, you said something so powerful and that intrigued me, and especially when you mentioned about Olympics. You said that you have got comparatively lesser threshold and that tends to boredom. Olympics is all about mastery, that a master spends the maximum time on plateau, practicing the same thing again and again and again. How do you deal with this polarity?
I think part of it is in your individual makeup, Gaurav. I have a personality that is generally never satisfied with what I did yesterday. And I quite like to see that with other people as well. I like to work with people who have an aspiration to do something a little bit better tomorrow than they did today. And I'll give you an example of that, Gaurav. I, for example, have a long executive career that when I recruited, I would far rather recruit somebody who is at a score of, say, 7 out of 10 with something to achieve than go with a candidate who was already at 9.5 out of 10.
Yeah.
So I'm looking to work with people who are perhaps on a similar place to me, that it's what's next.
What's
And
next?
to make sure that if you're in industry, your product or your service or your customer service or the way that you develop your people is constantly looking forward and making sure that you're protecting yourself with some kind of competitive advantage.
So, but when you said that there's a tendency to get bored very easily, and thus you move from one space to another. So how do you make sure that you continue to get mastery? Having a lot of patience, masters don't switch their industries so often. They continue to dwell into deeper, one step at a time.
Yeah. I think continuous learning, whether it be academic or professionally, is the key to that, Gaurav. So what I tried to do in an executive career prior to coaching was always try and recognize there were things missing and to try and fill those gaps with more exposure to areas where I hadn't had those skills or experiences before. So to gain that mastery, hopefully, would be to recognize perhaps as a CFO that, and I'll give you the example, from my first CFO role to my second CFO role, I recognized that I needed to have more exposure to mergers and acquisitions. I needed to have more exposure to dealing with foreign currency. I needed to have more exposure in dealing with international operations and raising debt and equity. So this is a very long story cut very, very short, but I found myself a role that gave me those additional areas. And that propelled me to another level of being better, not necessarily a master, but being better than I was before. And then in subsequent roles, I tried to add something each time that was different to what it was in my previous role.
Jeremy, from that space to making a complete shift into executive coaching is a Herculean task. People resist any kind of transition, and especially when a transition is of the magnitude that you are talking about. You were the CFO, and then you made a transition to a very different industry, and that too from scratch. Please take us through the whole process.
I'm going to go back, Gaurav, to 1991. And that was the first time I delivered what I now would call coaching and training to some relatively new people in my organization. So this is going back to 1991, and I did 2 weeks of this with 30 to 40 individuals and of quite an intensive basis. That was the start of the fire that burned for over 25 years before I put the fuel on the fire. And in and amongst that time, as a CFO, I'd done various things which were edging towards coaching and mentoring and developing individuals. When I decided to become a coach and a mentor, there were two individuals in my organization in 2014. And they both reported to me, but they were underdeveloped, they were underappreciated, they were underpaid, and much to the horror of my colleagues at the time, I picked them out because I'd met them, I thought I understood them, and thought, I'm going to give you this chance to progress yourself like somebody gave me a chance in a different organization in 1992. And I'm going to give you that chance. I got more satisfaction from seeing them seize their day with the opportunities I gave them than I was getting from being a CFO. So that was the real fuel. The other experience I had was that you look on LinkedIn, there are thousands and thousands of coaches calling them a coach. I want to be somebody with a specific reference point. So I took myself back off to university and I learned the academic skills. And now I've formed my practice, which has a very tight focus about working with people who I think are very well aware of all of the gains of progressing in your career and progressing in your role, but perhaps haven't spent too much time thinking about all of the pains of the role, the greater accountability, the more responsibility, the time that you have to be the leader in a crisis. Not many people think too long about those areas. And unfortunately, if I was to turn around, you would see quite a lot of scars on my back, Gaurav. And so therefore, my coaching philosophy is based actually around, in fact, a very, very recent article from a person I know you know well, Professor David Clutterbuck. He produced an article only last week in the International Journal of Evidence-Based Coaching and Mentoring, which was all about how do you develop yourself as a coach? And his conclusion, along with some colleagues, was we've got lots of models about coaching, we've got lots of processes, but actually it's about reflexivity and understanding yourself that can make you a much better coach. So my transition to get to be a practicing coach and a mentor is based around blending and leveraging the models, the processes, the academic skills, but actually taking what I think I learned over 25 years as a CFO, fusing them together and generating something which, when I speak to clients, whether it's organizations or individuals, they say, you've been where I want to be and you've done some work academically. Please, can I work with you to see where we can go to together? That's my philosophy, Gaurav.
So help me understand, Jeremy, since you're talking about a transition, right? What aspect of being a CFO help you today being a coach to several executives that you work with? And what aspects of being a CFO come in the way?
I think you have to forget, to a certain extent, in answering your second part of the question, that you have been a CFO. It's great to have that knowledge, but maybe the first thing we should do as an ex-CFO being a coach is to forget that I've been where, is to forget that you might know the answer. My coaching model is about self-awareness for the coachee and for them to generate their solutions to the problems. Hopefully, I might have a reasonable amount of experience about the kind of problems that they're experiencing. So as a CFO coming into the coaching arena, I'm looking for commonality with some of the problems, but asking my coaches the right questions for them to create their own solutions to the problem. I think it's very easy for other coaches and myself to try and think about some of those areas where you think, I know exactly where you've been, and I might exactly know the answer, but that won't help the coachee. It's up to them to generate those answers. So my mantra is to promote the self-generation of the solutions for those people in the coachee position, Gaurav.
Jeremy, every time when a person is going through this program or when they're in the process of becoming a coach, people tell me that the most difficult part is to let themselves move out of the way. What was the most difficult part for you while you were on your journey to become a coach?
I can answer that very specifically. Two areas. And I did my first qualification with the Institute of Leadership and Management and met some fantastic people from all sorts of different walks of life, people from the military, people from the National Health Service, people who worked at the university, people who'd done management buyouts. My second qualification, which was a master's degree at Newcastle University in the UK, I again met some unbelievably stimulating people. My tutors were at another level. And I remember in almost the very first day, they said, this is going to be quite a difficult journey for you. And I, together with the rest of my cohort, looked at each other and we're all thinking the same thing, Gaurav. Well, why? Why is this going to be difficult? And they said, just remember what we said. You're going to find it uncomfortable and you're going to find it difficult because you're going to have to look in the mirror a lot deeper than you've ever looked before.
Yeah.
And they were absolutely right. The academic work, the models, the processes, the understanding about teams, that was relatively not straightforward. It was challenging, but the most difficult part was the self-awareness. And there was one particular exercise that they asked us to do, Gaurav. They said, today will be the most difficult day in your 2.5 years worth of academic work. Because what we're going to ask you to do is do a timeline of your life. And we're going to ask you to do it with people who you really only meet once every 4 to 5 weeks or so. And we want you to really open up with your experiences. Now, I did mine and I thought I was being incredibly open with some of the challenges. So you asked me a question right at the start, Gaurav. What's influenced you? What shaped you? They said, do that. And with two almost complete strangers, I thought I'd been fairly open. And the bond that was created between, it was two other people in my small group. What they told me about their lives was incredibly difficult and traumatic. And in the space of a 2-hour piece of work, we created an incredibly tight-knit group because we'd shared some of the challenges that we'd all had in getting to this coaching journey. After that, it became slightly easier. So that was a really challenging time in the academic work, but incredibly valuable as well.
You said that one of the most difficult part for any of the coaches on their journey is the part of self-awareness, because we have to look at those deeper aspects of ourselves that we have never seen in the past. What aspect did you get to know about yourself that you were not comfortable with?
And that was the question, almost word for word, that we were asked to explore and think about and try and be as honest as we could as a coach, because this was all about being a coach. How can you be a better coach if you haven't done this reflexive work yourself as an individual? And I found it incredibly uncomfortable. I actually probably found it easier to relate it to relatively unknown people by saying, to answer your question, one, I've spent most of my career, Gaurav, working with organizations that are very, very focused upon financial metrics. And recognizing that for myself, falling into that category of being a corporate straitjacket individual with less of a personality, but fitted the mold of the individual in that executive career. So quite an uncomfortable element. And also from a personal sense as well, recognizing that some of the almost badges of honor as an executive, working late,
Yeah.
being away, actually were to the detriment of my family. And that's quite difficult to reflect on, I think.
Yeah. So, Jeremy, you said something so profound. You said that I realized that I've always been a corporate, straight-jacketed executive and less of a personality.
Mm.
Always working hard, late nights. So when you made that transition from corporate, straight-jacketed executive to becoming the person that you wanted to become, what did you have to let go of? And how did you make it happen?
I think you have to let go and cast aside the profile and the public persona that other people see, and perhaps you've portrayed and wanted people to see. So some of those badges of respectability. So even though there might be professional status points, if you're moving into an area where all of that's gone, what did you do today? Oh, I was in a board meeting. I flew to Chicago and back in the last 3 days. I met with a senior leadership team. We acquired a business in Hong Kong, for example. All of those are quite nice and interesting things to say.
Absolutely.
And all of that's gone. All of that's gone. And your focus is not about you as an individual. It's about your coachee and your mentee.
Yeah.
And you might be invisible to that.
Yeah.
And I think that how I deal with it, I'm still dealing with it. I'm still dealing with it.
It's not easy, isn't it?
It's not easy at all, Gaurav, because that's exactly the question. And that was the uncomfortable element of the academic work, which was right up front in the first 6 months of the master's degree, when we perhaps were thinking that period of time would be about academic processes and models. And they said, no, this is about working on you for the first 6 months. And as you say, stripping it back, what's left? How do you want to develop what's left into, and I remember the phrases that were very consistently used. This is about you. And you may not solve this in 2.5 years, but we're preparing the ground for you creating your own identity as a coach. We don't want robotic coaches. We want you to decide. And my colleagues, my cohorts would say, so I had one of my colleagues did her research project, for example, on coaching in the outdoors with women over 45. Very, very specific, but that's what she wanted to do, for example. So this was all about creating kind of coach do you really want to be?
I think this transition, or for that matter, Jeremy, I personally believe transition of any kind brings in some bit of fear, because the identity that you have created for yourself at the existing place will not continue to serve you. So unless I create a different identity, I'll not be able to transition. And as you mentioned, that it is going to help you to find your identity. And I would just add one more word. It's going to help you to find your healthy identity. What you have done a research on evaluating the effectiveness of leadership development on executives. I mean, what was that point in your life when you decided to do a research on this subject? It's not an easy research, by the way.
I had come across, in making that transition as a coach, some of the what I would call legacy opinions from people who said, I don't understand coaching. I'm not quite sure what it's all about. I've heard about it, but I'm still investing in generic, traditional learning and development techniques. So I had this seed of doubt planted by other people who said, I'm not quite sure. And it's a relatively still young industry and still relatively unregulated. I wanted to
Yeah.
solve that problem. So I
Yeah.
almost took an executive career approach, which was, first of all, before you do anything in an organization, tell me the problem that your organization is solving, and then tell me what your solution is. And then we've got to start. So I almost adopted a similar mindset to my coaching problem, which was the problem is people don't know how to evaluate it. Or there's,
Yeah.
as my academic work proved, there's so much variety in how it's evaluated that I thought that's what I'm going to do. So if I'm given the opportunity to do a year-long research project, and which the result of which was a dissertation, I'm going to invest my time in something that, one, I think will help clients and organizations, and number two, I think it will really help me to understand some of those challenges from individuals in ranges of organizations that are struggling with the concept of the fact that coaching doesn't have a black and white answer.
Yeah.
Can we actually do some work and do some research and investigate that to actually narrow down some of the opportunities that you have to evaluate coaching outcomes?
Yeah. So how did you evaluate this? What was the process, one? And what did you find out at the end of the day?
The process I followed was, first of all, I examined what is a lot of literature, some quite contemporary, about the evaluation. So Eli and colleagues, 2010, big piece of research, didn't really still conclude on how to evaluate it. More contemporary pieces up to 22, 23, 24 even. So I started with reviewing the existing, not just academic, but also practitioner literature as well. And that set me down the road of, I think I'm on the right track, because there's a very limited element of consensus. So there's the lack of consensus meant there's more opportunity for me to do the work.
Of
The way
course.
I actually carried it out was I worked with an organization who very generously gave me permission to work with their senior executives. And I did semi-structured interviews with their executives and said, look, leadership development coaching, executive coaching, what does it mean to you? And I did between 40-minute and 50-minute interviews. And when he transcribed that, as you will know, Gaurav, that's a lot of information in 40 to 50 minutes. And then I used a technique, it's actually called the Braun and Clark thematic analysis, to actually determine the themes and the codes of what people were telling me. The conclusion of that was it was amazing because I received information that I was able to theme around 6 key areas, but the extremes of those areas were very diverse. At one end of the spectrum, Gaurav, I had perhaps some more traditional direct evaluation techniques. So they focused around 3 areas: the individual, the organization, and the customer. So I had 3 distinct themes that said, if we look at some of those metrics, the organization might improve their performance. The individual might perform better against their objectives. And ultimately, the customer might experience benefits as well through customer surveys. We can measure that to a certain extent. There still remained a difficulty in analyzing to what extent the coaching was responsible for it. There was an opportunity to do that.
Coaching is only one element of several
Absolutely.
things happening.
And perspective and context was key as well. So the overriding sense was context is important and perspective is important. The other 3 areas of the 6 focused upon the rather more holistic view of what leadership development and executive coaching is there to do. So you almost went upper level, and the executives that I interviewed said, and I'm summarizing very much here, but they said, first of all, we want everybody to be able to be a leader in our organization. And that's what we want leadership development coaching to do. We want it to be a cascading waterfall whereby leadership development coaching is about behaviors and values, and everybody can display that. So everybody can be a leader. It went even further by saying, in order to be able to influence that, we want to have what, let's call it a coaching foundation factor. We want a culture within the organization that said, we accept that we're not always right, and therefore we accept coaching to get us to be a different place. And then perhaps the most extreme one, going further detached, was we want our organization, as a result of leadership development coaching, to actually address societal deficits. So this was a remarkable conclusion and the organization I worked with had a semi-public objective to it. But they said, actually, we exist because there's a problem in society, and more people are aligning, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals to what their organization is trying to achieve. So at the most extreme, you had correction of societal deficits. Perhaps at the more near term, you had organizational KPIs. And so we had 6 areas that came out as distinct, clear core themes.
And isn't it so beautiful if the organizations are saying that we need leaders in an organization where it has a cascade effect? Isn't it beautiful where people are saying that we would like to see a shift in their behaviors and values? Isn't it beautiful when people are saying that we would like to have a coaching culture? You spoke about the importance of perspective and context, Jeremy. Tell me more about that. I believe that the context can change the content. It can shift everything, the way you look at anything in life. You change the context and the movie would be very, very different.
And I'm going to reference a piece of work that I think for anybody listening will be a great piece of work to review. And it's relatively contemporary as well, done by an individual called Daminda Rajasinghe. And it was a PhD thesis done at the University of Leeds in the UK, which is very close to me. And it was all about the perspective and the context of coaching and how it would affect the evaluation. Great piece of work.
You said, who has done that?
Daminda Rajasinghe in 2018. And that's about the creation of perspective balance on coaching evaluation. And he's very recently cooperated with Professor Clutterbuck on the article that I referenced earlier in this discussion as well. So for me, that perspective, the organization I did my research in happened to be a VCSE organization, so voluntary community and social enterprise, which gave it, for me, again, that extra incentive to understand why people wanted to extend coaching. And some of the, let's call them the softer side of things, came through very strongly. One thing that came through was a concept that listeners might be quite interested in, is this concept of obliquity, whereby instead of giving people direct targets to achieve, coaching can give people the indirect levers in order for them to achieve them. So we give them guidance on leadership behaviors, which might be empathy, kindness, respect. And we're going to focus upon those levers of indirect abilities, which we believe as a coaching foundation factor, as a culture, will ultimately lead to people being better at whatever level to deliver the objectives of the organization. The other theme that came across very, very strongly was you had to have this linkage between coaching outcomes and the vision, the mission, and the values of the organization. And coaching had to do that.
It's so powerful. I would definitely refer to that study that you've been talking about, where the context and the perspective has a huge impact on leadership development. And you said the other one is obliquity, right? Where we can, if we can focus on the levers
Yes.
it'll have a direct impact on the performance of an individual. According to your research, Jeremy, what has been the key insight that you have received? Is there any connection between leadership development and business performance? I'm sure there is, but what does research say?
Yeah, I still refer to the fact that the academic, particularly research, talks about a lack of consensus. And my research was aimed to a certain extent at dispelling that and recognizing that no matter how indirect those targets could be, you can still tie coaching and leadership and executive coaching into the strategic objectives of the organization. So some of the more obvious direct ones would be you would look at individual performance metrics. So you could look at how people perform against their targets. You could ask them how much they're enjoying their continuous learning. You would look at the organizational metrics. From a more indirect point of view, you would ask people about what they're seeing as an individual. Are other people seeing the benefits of coaching in an individual? So what about their behaviors, their display of values, how they interact with their colleagues, how they teamwork in various settings and forums within an organization? So what I took away from this is that it is measurable, but the critical thing for me, one of my major conclusions was addressing one of the deficits, I think, of coaching interventions at the moment. You have to agree what the evaluation metrics are at the start of the process, not at the end. And it sounds incredibly simple, but that was one of the major conclusions. How do you know it's working unless you've already decided what those measures of success are?
Yeah. And that too at the levers level, not at the performance level. Is my understanding right?
Yes.
It's like if we can assist, if we can train these individuals to become better coaches, in case they can develop more empathy, in case they can develop more connection, in case they can learn the art of asking questions, in case somehow we can enhance the listening. So, Jeremy, very often people ask me, Gaurav, how are you going to measure the effectiveness of the leadership development coaching that you are doing? What's the simplest possible answer that I can give them? And what is the process that we should be following that could help them understand that it is working?
I think I've got quite a simple and very quick answer to that, which came out of my research. And one of those answers that came up, which was one of the core themes, was we want all of our employees, all of our colleagues to want to be part of this scheme. Because if people want to be part of it and be engaged with it, it's working. People see the benefits of it in either behaviors or values, and we want it to be open to everybody. And this was a really strong theme. We don't want it to be traditionally called leadership development coaching. That's for the elite. It's for however many people you have on the leadership development course. If it's 10, who's number 11? Because number 11 is not very happy about it. And number 12 is even less happy. Numbers 1 to 10 think it's great. So how can we address coaching with leadership qualities to all of the organization? And whether that's done through setting up an organization-wide coaching and mentoring scheme, we would like the people who are in receipt of coaching to want to be the next level of coaches internally. Maybe that's one of the definitions of success.
Yeah. And, as per your research, what percentage of leaders showed a remarkable improvement in the areas that they wanted to improve in as a result of the coaching that people underwent?
Rather than answer with a strict percentage, although in general the answer was, when I asked the question, my actual questions was, can you give me examples of how successful it's been in organizations where it's been implemented? That level was of the order of the upper quartile, so 75% plus success rate. And when asked perhaps for why it didn't work, that was perhaps more interesting. You would receive answers that were on the basis of people are finding the transition uncomfortable. So going back to your questions earlier,
Oh,
Gaurav,
absolutely.
some people enter the process perhaps resistant to change. It's part of a leadership initiative. I don't need to think about you. You become a rock as opposed to being a sponge. I don't
Sponge,
need
yeah.
to understand more.
Yeah.
And a number of examples were quoted whereby it they got better, but it took people a while to be a little bit more open
Yeah.
and expressive with exposing a weakness. The ability to say, do you know what? Yes, you're right. I'm not very good in a, in
Mm,
in a in a group meeting. I'm not very
mm,
good at expressing my views
mm.
and getting people to accept that that's actually a good thing. Is
Yeah.
that expressing you're not very good at something is not being weak. It's expressing the fact that I'd actually like to do it better.
Yeah. 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 I can relate to that because it's easy said than done. We can talk about change is inevitable. We can talk about it that we all need to change to grow in our lives. And yet, when change happens, somehow resistance creeps in. Jeremy, let's suppose you have to start your corporate journey again. And if you have a choice to hire a coach for yourself,
Mm.
what behavior shifts would you choose to change in your own self that could possibly help you to become an even effective leader that you were?
I think it's a great question. And it's fairly easy for me, I think, to look back and think, what could I have been a lot better at?
Hmm.
And I think being far too focused upon my own metrics and performance
Hmm.
and assuming that everyone else would follow
Hmm.
would would be one key aspect to try and change.
Hmm.
And you fall into this trap, maybe unconsciously, about thinking, well, if I'm delivering, everyone else will be delivering,
Yeah.
and not being cognizant of how other people are. So not
Hmm.
understanding, I think, enough about my colleagues, my team, how they're behaving, the fact that they are probably very good at things that I'm not very good at,
Yeah.
and leveraging all of that. So the ability to just stop, I think, and say, how's everybody else doing apart
Yeah.
from me?
Yeah. 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 Thank you, Jeremy, for sharing that. Very often we take it for granted that they would understand what I'm talking about, even if I've not communicated to them. It could be as silly as that recently there was a shift of leadership in our organization. And without even realizing, the person A would be reporting into person B now, henceforth. And we did not even communicate to person A because all this while, this lady has been reporting into another person. Now there's a shift in the role because of some restructuring as an organization we are going through. And oh, of course, she would understand. There are so many things we take for granted in life without realizing that they are coming from a different world. You know, Jeremy, picking up the same thread, taking things for granted. What is it in your life that you have taken for granted that at times you feel apologetic for yourself? You carry some bit of guilt, some bit of regrets here and there.
I think accepting, or rather not accepting, the fact that people don't think the same way as me.
Yeah.
And if you have a mindset,
Mm,
which for me, as we said before, is about the next challenge, the next step,
mm,
you can get blinkered, I think. So again, going back to what would I tell my younger self,
mm,
it's to say, actually, not everybody thinks the same way as you,
mm,
but they can deliver as much, if not more than you, in a different way, in their
mm,
different area, and they will do it differently to you. And they may
mm,
not work at the same speed or in the
mm,
same way or with the same methodology,
mm.
but they have their own individuality and their personalities to do that.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I think not seeing that soon enough
Mm.
And even to the extent of coaching, if I was to go back 30 years, that legacy opinion of what coaching does
Yeah.
had that almost um, badge of failure associated to it. So,
Mm.
particularly, this could be exaggerated by the organization as well. And I guess the kind of question you get is, what? I've hired you to do this job,
Mm.
and I have to get you a coach to be able to help you do it.
Mm.
That's how does that work? And I think that's the legacy opinion
Mm.
that
Yeah.
goes back to very traditional, old-fashioned organizations, which is
Yeah.
I've hired you to do a job, I'm
Mm.
paying you all this money, and yet you still have to go outside and ask somebody else how to do it.
Yeah.
And I think moving away from that into the continuous learning,
Mm.
I don't know everything,
Yeah.
that exposing a weakness isn't the same as being weak. It's
Yeah.
actually acceptance that you can get better.
Jeremy, let's say tomorrow you have been given a task of making UK the coaching capital of the world. Where would you begin? What would you do differently?
How would I make the UK the coaching capital of the world? I would add a few other things into this category, in that I would add a few things
Mm.
into the educational curriculum from quite an early age. I think there's a number of things that don't get taught or highlighted alongside the traditional qualifications. So I think if I'm creating a coaching foundation factor for the UK, in the
Mm.
same way as my research said, create the coaching foundation factor for an organization and a
Yeah.
culture of
Yeah.
distributed leadership, by the time you get to 18, 19, 20 years old, you've missed the opportunity to develop that. So, in keeping with quite a few other life skills, I'd be introducing the concept of take somebody at 11 years old and begin to put them into situations where they have to negotiate with people, where they
Mm.
have to sit round a table and solve a problem that isn't just a black and white answer in science or engineering.
Yeah.
And I think that sounds quite simplistic,
Yeah.
but it would develop some people skills that you could
Mm.
carry as their own mastery of how to do things in adult life.
Mm. Jeremy, thank you so much. I think what a wonderful conversation it was. We went to your childhood, the transitions that you've gone through, and how and what could be done to make UK the coaching capital of the world.
Thank you so much, Gavin. Thank you for the invitation.